Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is SIC Talks number 64. I'm joined by Daisy Alioto. And Daisy, please correct me if I got the pronunciation of your name wrong there. But Daisy is somebody who I have admired from afar for a long time. Her involvement in Dirt, the burgeoning media company, is something that I've tracked very closely, read deeply, subscribed to, and I would encourage you guys all to do the same. But it is a fascinating proposition because it represents to me a new model. Daisy also is a very prolific tweeter or X artist, if we want to call it that, and as well as just I think an important thinker in the space. So I'm very pleased that she's here. The show, if you haven't tuned in before, tracks stories that I'm including in my weekly digest, SIC Weekly. And so I've shared an advanced version of that with Daisy, and she's picked out a couple of stories that she thought were relevant. We'll also talk about Dirt. We'll also talk about probably how Daisy got to Dirt and where she sees Dirt going. And we'll talk hopefully about some of the other fun, scurrilous, discouraging, and encouraging stuff that's happening in the week. So anyway, Daisy, welcome.
I love SIC. I read it every year. I read it every week, and I often forward it. So I also feel like there's, we do some link curation as well, once or twice a week typically. And so I do feel like there's a dialogue sometimes between links that I end up discovering in SIC and including in Dirt, or like vice versa. And I always, first thing, do Control F Dirt to see if there was a Dirt article included. And when there is, I'm happy. When there isn't, I think I should have done better this week. So it's really fun to be here. Thank you.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure I find that tremendously flattering. Thank you. And I cite Dirt stories a lot. I pull from Dirt and your link curation. And I just think it's a kind of a remarkable thing. I have been following it since its inception in, I guess, maybe late pandemic or immediately post-pandemic. I guess really high pandemic, actually, now that I think about it.
It would have been December 2020. So yeah, we were still kind of in lockdown at that point. I think the vaccine rolled out like maybe in February of 2021.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yeah, it would have been, but it was like post Tiger King. I know that. I've heard people describe pandemic because people's sense of time was so disrupted, still is, and like my memory is very I typically have a very good memory, but my memory from that time is very non-linear and bizarre, that like I've heard some people describe it as like pre and post Tiger King.
Yeah. I love that. I love that sort of marker. It's really interesting. I just literally today bought a book called New York 1962 to 1964, and it's a journal of or an anthology of art that happened in that time, right? It's the burgeoning, the flowering of pop art in particular, but it also tracks literally by day all of these developments that happen in those years. And it's Marilyn Monroe's death, and it's things that President Kennedy did, and then it's President Kennedy's death, and it's releases by the Beatles and whatever it is. And it made me think, my God, if I went back and tried to chronologize the time since March 13th, 2020, I would be hard pressed. It would be sort of impossible to do, despite the fact that I have this weekly record with SIC to do that. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
mm-hmm. I was going to say like the same thing. I feel like I've never been good at keeping a diary or a journal. And I think that's part of why I tweet so much. And if I had to go back and reconstruct my memory, I would say I've outsourced a lot of it to the production of Dirt and what Dirt has covered, and then probably also Twitter/X.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing for me too. I mean, in a sort of a similar thing. I don't know if you've heard this, but there are a bunch of Vice documentaries being made, and so people have been reaching out to me about participating in those. And one of the things that I have struggled with a little bit is like, how do I even remember what happened in 2005, and it's had me going back to like into archives of the magazine and stuff that I've kept to just try to figure that all out. Really remarkable. I had a conversation with our mutual friend David Marks about this the other day, and it was like it was fascinating. I'm sorry. Anyway, please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I know that we'll get to this, but when you have journalism layoffs or media industry layoffs, and one of the first things that happens is people get their emails shut off, you're actually erasing a lot of the institutional memory of somebody who's going to participate in that type of documentary. And I do think that that's, in a sense, deliberate. It's a power move. And I've been laid off twice, I think, in a formal way. I've had contracts end, but after the first layoff, I started backing stuff up, to my own computer, to my own Gmail address, and on my personal Gmail. I think that this would give like a type A person like truly a panic attack, but I don't ever delete emails. So, and part of that again is like, I'm not keeping records of my life in a formal way. And recently it's also like GChat sort of went away, but sometimes I can surface GChat if I search specific terms in my Gmail.
Right. Sure.
And even recently, some stuff came up. I was searching for something else and I found some old GChats and emails like with and about a relationship, basically a romantic relationship that I kind of forgot I had. And so like, it's not even how would I tell the story of my career. I'm actually probably not even at this point a reliable narrator for my own early 20s.
Sure.
Because, memory is such a fluid thing. And often, especially with things that were hard or disappointing, one of the things that our brain does is it suppresses it and erases it.
Sure.
But, you have to be committed to writing your version of the truth based on what you remember. But if you're in a situation that's considered nonfiction, that's when it's challenging because you want to be as objective as possible about the way you experience something. But the way we experience things, as soon as it's over, we've already started rewriting it and retelling it. So, yeah.
It's funny. My wife and I just finished watching The Curse, which I don't know if you've like gone down the rabbit hole.
I didn't, but I've seen so many people that I admire recommended that I think I must, but I don't know if it'll be now.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, it's an interesting, I mean, for us, like my wife and I have been together for 25 years. And so for us, every, shared interaction like that is always an interesting reflection on our, relationship and our dynamic, and particularly one that's about, married people or whatever it is. But I suggested it. We started watching it. It is cringe core to the nth. And I was immediately like, I can't watch this anymore. And then she said, oh, I'm into it. I want to keep going. And so then I had to keep going. And then I liked it and she wanted to stop watching it. Anyway, we made it all the way through. But the reason I bring it up, I do recommend it to people, but it's interesting. And Jonah from Blackbird Spyplane wrote something pretty big and discursive about it that you shouldn't read until you've seen the whole thing, because the last episode is a doozy. But I bring it up because it calls into question very specifically the nature of truth, the nature of subjectivity, the nature of sin, salvation, all of this stuff, in a way where I found myself returning to physics. Particularly, do you know Carla Rovelli? Do you read or familiar with Carla Rovelli at all?
I'm not sure. Jog my memory. I haven't taken physics since high school.
Yeah, well, I mean, and this is the reason I read Rovelli, is that I not only have I not taken physics since high school, I didn't like it in high school. I didn't know why, and I now have a high school senior in the house, so it's like trying to ground him in it. but Rovelli he's an Italian physicist, and he works at the quantum physics level, which is super theoretical, string theory, the smallest particles in the universe, the bottom of black holes, this kind of stuff. And what he talks about essentially is it's like everything that we perceive is a construct, and we are experiencing it, but that doesn't make it real or true or permanent or even or ephemeral in any way. It's all relative, right? This is the smartest thing ever said, is everything is relative. And the funny thing, as a way to tie this all back, is there's an article this week that's in the newsletter about how easy it is to delete things online and how easy it is to destroy this perception of permanence and
is that
objectivity. Let me see.
Is that embedded?
Yeah, exactly. It was embedded earlier this week.
Yeah, I read that.
And I just think it's like it's a sensation we're all having and grappling with and trying to rationalize in a interesting way. And the curse does a good job of surfacing it. Not to mention just like
3 things came to mind
weird.
as you were speaking just now.
Yeah. Sorry, I just monologue. Go for it.
Apologies for the crosstalk. No, it's great. First of all, when I was in high school physics, I did pay attention because my teacher was very interesting. Mm-hmm. He gave out like superlative awards at the end of the year. And I got an award for being best at guessing where a scientist was from based on their last name, which is like crazy because it sounds like I would be on like right-wing Twitter now. I don't know why I was so good at it. I think I just knew like little cheat codes like, oh, IAN, this guy's Armenian.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Isn't that messed up though? Like, why did I get that award? I'm still actually pretty good at guessing where people are from though. The other thing is people, so I'm married. I've been with my husband 5 years total, 3 years coming up on 4 married in June during the pandemic. So I actually got Zoom married.
Wow, did you really? Holy moly.
Yeah. Like our officiant was in California. It was like, everyone in our family was just like on Zoom, like Brady Bunch style.
Wow.
So in that sense, I kind of was part of this like COVID bride cohort that I guess 100%. Will, like, as we historicize that moment, be meaningful. But I think people have this sense that like the hard part of living with another person is like, oh, they might be in the bathroom too long, or they chew their food, or they do this or that. But to me, like I'm not that neurotic, and sure, like that stuff comes up, like, take the trash out, whatever. But the real challenge, and I think that the way relationships are talked about on social media really sort of under talks about this, is like you're living with another version of truth constantly. You're cohabitating with somebody else's truth. And that's the core challenge of any relationship. It's not the habitual stuff. It's not the corporeal reality of another person in your space. And so, hearing people talk about the curse and realizing that that might be kind of maybe a core question, it's something I'm super interested in. So I will want to watch that at some point. The other thing I was going to say is I did write for Dirt about archives and deleting things recently, or saving things, in this piece called Alexandria, because my friend Anthony died. And
right. Yeah. I'm sorry. Excuse me for interrupting. That happened, or that you published that around the time that we were starting to talk about this conversation. And I have to say, like, I should have offered my condolences on your loss. But I also I felt very strange about it, because it was like, how do I ask you to do this thing while you're in a state, Anyway, sorry.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Yeah, I'm obviously still really sad about it, but I felt like we were able to, like, Anthony worked in media, so there were a lot of very online people sort of collectively mourning. And what came up in this piece, Alexandria, was that Anthony had, I guess, I don't know, temporarily deactivated his social media before he died in like a really sudden, unexpected way. And by chance, somebody had archived his tweets about a year ago. And so Dirt had previously published something about the degradation of Google and SEO. And as like a side note, our contributor, Michelle Santiago Cortez, had said, maybe we should all take more responsibility for archiving one another online.
Yeah.
Which I thought was like a cool sentiment, but I was like, okay, yeah, maybe, when it published. And then once this thing happened with Anthony, and I realized that like the only reason everyone was able to go back and read his tweets were like, which were so much a part of who he was, his sense of humor, the way he viewed the world, the stuff, even the songs that he liked, which somebody reconstructed a Spotify playlist of all the songs he had mentioned on Twitter. Obviously he had an offline self as well, but the online self and the offline self were very much connected for everyone that knew him. If this person had not done that, all of that would have been lost forever. And so I went from being like, oh, it would be cool, I guess, if we could remember to archive other people and the people that we care about and what they've done digitally, to being like full maxi, like, yes, this is the future, this is the way. And so when I saw that piece it embedded this week, I did feel like it's becoming part of a continued conversation that smart people are thinking about.
100%. Well, it's interesting, and I think to me there's an interest there is a direct sort of thread to what you're doing with Dirt, because I think there are a lot of people who came up in this generation of media that I was early in, and that you came into and have been fully a part of over the last 10, 15 years, whatever the case is, that are now being confronted with the economic realities of a media ecosystem that doesn't allow them to participate the way that they did. And they're going to have to find parallel places to take those skills and aptitudes and make use of them. And there's something pretty melancholic about that, because it's no longer like I'm in it for the purity of the exercise, or I'm in it because of the pure sort of passion for the subject, but rather like this is a skill and I have to apply it the same way as if I were a pipe fitter, I was applying it. You've, with Dirt, I think, illustrated a secondary path for those people, right? Which is like, create your own thing, become independent, find alternate monetization models, build a business up, and become the next generation of stuff. And I think that's really remarkable and admirable. But I also think part of this zeitgeist of or gestalt around, preserving stuff is the notion that like, I, as a extremely online person or creative person, am going to have to set that part aside. I don't want to lose that essence of myself, because if I do, I will be, less than in some way. I don't know. I never thought about this before. I just said it to you, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're mourning. A lot of people are mourning what the industry used to be. People who never got a chance to participate are mourning what they thought their career would be. I got drinks with an investor last night, and he said to me, how are you feeling? Your industry is collapsing around you. And I was like, yes, it is. And he said, but you're in control. And I said, well, I just have to survive it. My company just has to survive it, not me personally, because for so long it was me personally, I have to survive it. And now the fear was that the core fear was, I said this before, I'm going to lose my job and then I'm going to run out of money. And now I can't lose my job, but if I run out of money, it's not me running out of money, it's Dirt running out of money.
Right.
So he said, you're in control. And I said, yes, I just have to survive. And he said, yes, exactly. Right. So there is a power to it, but it does introduce a whole other set of problems. And not every person wants to be a business person, but at this point you sort of have to be. And, there was a vision where there's an older vision now that we're already seeing like conclusion of, which was, oh, well, if somebody has something to offer, they're creative, they'll participate in the creator economy and we'll have 100 true fans or 1,000 true fans.
Right.
And that's the solution. And a lot of money poured into making tools for that before people realized actually it's not really the solution, because success and the economic distribution will follow the same patterns as we see in fine art or music, where you have some people succeed, kind of a messy middle of people that are doing okay, and then vast majority do not get traction and go anywhere, which is, I've talked about this before. So
yeah, for sure.
We know that the solution isn't the creator economy as it's been understood and marketed by consumer investors and, to a certain extent, Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
So what is it? That's my thesis, is we're entering the taste economy. I think the way that I've talked about the taste economy is probably still too broad for somebody to view it as actually instructive, which is like, okay, what kind of business do I build?
Mm-hmm.
But I've said pretty strongly, and I've seen other very smart people say, we're entering a period where the distinction between one business and another, for the most part, will be taste, not proprietary technology and not supply chain innovation. And, we'll see that on the software side, we'll see it on the consumer side, we'll see it in packaged goods, on the type of stuff that Andrea writes about at Snackshot.
Yep.
Really, a lot of the categories that SIC is like subdivided into, and I love the way that you break it down. You could layer taste over each of those and try to figure out who will be the winners and the losers on a corporate level. And for me, I think that that's the best way that I could understand the impact of AI, because we don't really know whether it'll be the incumbents like Microsoft that will win, or whether it'll be, the Sam Altmans.
Right.
And I think if somebody says they know which platform will win, or which sort of like wrapper over info that like
the
everyone's
underlying
kind of drawing
technology,
from, that they're lying. Nobody knows. But we
Yeah.
do know that the only way to build a business that is resistant to being replaced by AI is to build a business that optimizes in the direction of taste. And so the taste economy is essentially like a thesis of the known unknown. I am putting most of my eggs in the basket of taste, and that requires certain business fundamentals for Dirt to work, just to work as a business, of course. But that's the best way that I could understand it, and to have a vision of the future. But if you're trying to navigate that as an individual, it's really hard, right? Because if you've been laid off from the LA Times, it's like, well, I have something to offer. I have a perspective. I'm a tasteful person. Why is it that taste can be an effective moat for a business, but it can't represent job security for an individual? And that's tough,
So it's interesting, right? Like, first and foremost, I would say, if you asked me what business category future does Dirt represent, I don't know that I would say media or publishing. I think more what I would say is it's about a curated point of view, curated lifestyle, and that what that allows you to do is operate in a bunch of different directions. You're wearing a Dirt hat. I love the hat. I love the merch. I love the stuff that you guys have done.
I'm always on message.
Well, I mean, well done as the effective leader that you are. You should be. But I guess my thought is, it's like, you as Dirt have done events, you have done merch, you have done acquisition, you've done, in other words, brand diversification, you've done membership through blockchain, you've done membership through blockchain, but paid through credit cards, right? What kept me from subscribing for years was, I was just like, I can't, Wallace, no, I can't. And the minute you turned on credit cards, I'm like, okay, great, I'm in. But my point in saying all of that is, it's like, you are an expression. Dirt, you as Dirt as you're is an expression of the kind of taste and the point of view that you have on it, and you're not limited to simply being media or simply being any one of those things. I think most businesses have to head in a direction like that, where they have a fuller and deeper relationship with their consumers, audience, membership, whatever you want to call those people, the people that they serve and interact with, and who pay them for the privilege of that service and interaction. And I think that the person from the LA Times should be going, all right, where else do my skills fit as the rest of the world moves to a place where storytelling is commensurate and where distribution across, attention touch points happens. The problem, I think, is that those who are trained with this kind of capital J journalism worldview feel like they are demeaning themselves by doing that, right? To go into advertising or to go work with brands or to have to enter into a commercial transaction with an audience member, it feels like they are selling out in some kind of way. And I don't buy that fundamentally. I don't think it diminishes what they do at all. And I don't think it makes them any more noble or pure to avoid it. I wonder to what extent you hear that from people, or whether I'm just operating from an optic that's informed by Ian MacKay.
I will say, I don't want to be a generational terrorist, but Gen X is worried about that. Gen Xers that are losing their jobs, I think, have a little bit of residual notion of selling out. I think there are many, many more millennials and now even Gen Z who desperately are wanting to sell out for some stability and either don't know how, or the industries that aren't capital J journalism have not come up or expanded to accommodate them. So I think we're increasingly seeing people in a position where they do not actually have a moral opposition to going and working in an industry other than journalism or publishing, but they simply do not have the connections or they do not know how.
Right.
And that's really challenging. And so, yeah, I really can't fault people for the way that they navigate this, nor do I think you are. But you're right that this idea of selling out was important for a very long time. I think it still remains important to people, and even people who are willing to do it believe that that is what they're doing, but they want to do it because it represents stability. So I don't think we've completely removed the specter of selling out, or they think that they're going to performatively sell out in a way that's sort of ironic, and that that's kind of the peak of coolness.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Well, no. Look, I think we're very much on the same page, and I do think there's a generational aspect to it. By the way, I'm writing down. Matter of fact, I need to start taking notes because I can put them in the show notes. But I'm writing down generational terrorist. I don't know if that's
good. All right, trademarked. That'll be my next hat.
I love hats. I really love hats. So, well, all right. So let's talk about that then for a second. Like, okay? So, what I love about what you just said is, I mean, it sort of validates a feeling that I have, which is that the end of these sorts of cultural eras don't signal the erasure of the value of the cultural era, right? Or the value of the skills that come packaged into it. It just is a challenge to move those skill sets to someplace else. When one of the overriding narratives this week has been about the death of Pitchfork and the sort of eulogizing of an era of criticism or that sort of thing. How do you read all of that as someplace that is, as an outlet that is, and when I say critical, I mean critical in the best possible way, but like as an outlet that is fundamentally critical and is dealing with a lot of the same sort of psychograph, I think, that Pitchfork would have appealed to. How do you look at that phenomenon? Good, bad, ugly.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, not to go too far off track, but one thing that I've learned through integrating more into the world of venture capital, especially venture capitalists in New York, is a lot of them are cultural consumers, and a lot of them are
Yeah.
extremely passionate about music. And so I think we've seen it a few times, but especially around Pitchfork, we saw this sort of like thought influencers who are usually on Twitter talking about trends in investing with like some Spotify links peppered in, start to eulogize Pitchfork alongside the journalists. And I don't think that that is an accident. I think that there is an assumption that this critic class will exist forever, whether we, invest in it or not. I think when you see people with money, and I sort of, in my longer version of the Taste Economy, which might be published in some form at some point, talk
Sure.
about VCs, venture capital, as the invisible curator of the millennial consumer experience.
Yeah.
That a
Oh,
lot of
100%.
things that we associate with millennial culture, sweet green, millennial pink, this or that, you can trace back to where money was invested and what experiences were subsidized. So $5 Uber rides were subsidized. So what is the cultural equivalent of that?
Yeah.
So millennials, like, really, I mean, talk about generational terrorism. The millennial consumer, I think, is the consumer that came into adulthood at the peak of ZERP. And so
Yep.
it really is, I mean, you could make a qualitative analysis for how the millennial taste has been shaped by the curation, and investing is curation, which a lot of people don't understand, the curation of venture capitalists. And these same venture capitalists are now sitting on Twitter saying, oh my God, Pitchfork's going away. They do understand that the critic is important. They do not invest their money in a way that supports the critic class as an ongoing job. I think people who are paying attention still do not believe criticism is going away. They still believe that criticism is important, either democratized or not. Because what was the sort of pitch of Twitter? Well, sort of everyone can be a critic, right?
Right.
They are ambivalent to whether being a critic can be somebody's job. And my view is that if it's not somebody's job, if being a critic cannot support a certain saturation point of people doing it full time, we actually are losing an essential component of what criticism was, because it's the time, it's the space, it's the attention, it's not having to supplement your income with things that may or may not influence how you perceive, or force you to compromise on how you describe things.
Yeah.
So I think I always try to do this thing. I think us as journalists and writers actually kind of fall into the same trap sometimes as technologists or investors, in that we treat writing like it's a special class. Like, things that apply to other industries don't apply to writing. And so I always do this thing where I bring things back to a restaurant metaphor, because we all understand restaurants, and I think we have a little bit more of a like solid view of what's required, the resources required to have a restaurant. So I think if everyone who went to restaurants all of a sudden started to believe that, like, being the chef of the restaurant or running the restaurant didn't need to be somebody's full-time job, but the restaurant should still exist, I think we would all be like, well, wait a minute, how could restaurants exist? Like, how could they be open when you want to go? How could they produce the food that you want to eat? How could they employ people? How could they win awards? So we're in this really, really, really messy period where the idea of a critic, the idea of the media, the idea of a magazine, still so powerful on the symbolic level. But the willingness to put capital behind it in a sustainable way, and I don't include tech level valuations of BuzzFeed and Vice to be sustainable, is not keeping up, because too many people have convinced themselves that we can have criticism without investing in criticism.
It's
And
interesting.
I don't know what the solution is. Maybe dirt could be part of the solution for sure.
Well, it's funny too. I think there's a vector here that's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about I had a conversation with Carla McCormick. Do you know Carla McCormick's name at all?
Mm-mm.
So Carla was or is an art critic and somebody who did a lot of writing about, in particular, the artists of, let's call it, the Lower East Side in the end of the 90s, the early 2000s. This is the rise of street art. He was definitely on staff at Paper for a long time as an art critic, and has both, begun and moderated lots of debates about the contemporary art scene. I met him at a party once, and he was somebody that I had been aware of and admired for a long time for his his work. And we were having a conversation about how he was sort of keeping himself busy because it was post Paper or whatever it was. And he was just like, well, when you become a critic, you have to take a vow of essentially, like, you have to take an ascetics vow. You have to forego material things and basically live in this way that's, I don't know what, like a life of what's the word I'm searching for here? Daisy, help me. It's like
Did you say ascetic already?
sacrifice. Yeah, well, it's
sure.
right. You're sacrificing for the purity of the position, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with it. I think my answer to it is you can state the ways in which you are conflicted, and if you state them honestly and correctly, people can take them at face value and assess accordingly based on that declaration. But secondly, I think the millennial consumer, the millennial generation, gets exposed to enough of this sort of upwardly mobile aspirational lifestyle to start to go, well, I should be able to have it both ways. So why can't I? Why is this breaking down? They don't go, I'm joining the critics convent or, monastery or whatever, and submitting myself to this life of.
Interesting story. You might appreciate this. It's a sad story, but
Okay.
it comes from my family history. So I think, over the past few months, there's been a lot of conversation about, like, what does it mean to be Jewish? And I'm a quarter Jewish, but I wasn't raised Jewish. But my relatives who were Jewish, Hungarian Jewish, I feel very close to because they all worked in the arts.
Okay.
And I think there was a period when I was freelancing where I was doing family research and I was turning it into essays, one for long reads, one for Popula, when Popula was sort of, in full swing. And then mentioning on other places that, like, I was following the thread of this family history back and finding out that, I was related to people who were basically working for the literary review in Budapest, or one of the literary reviews in Budapest, which was called Nyugat, which means West. And so I have this relative named Artur Elek, who is an art critic for West. And I was able to find out stories about him, very detailed stories, through reading other people's memoirs, which kind of goes back to this idea of, like, archiving, which is my great-great-grandmother's brother, his former house is a museum in Budapest.
Oh,
And in
wow.
writing about it, I sort of had this line that was like, our my knowledge of my family history depends on the generosity of others, essentially. Like, strangers to me, people who aren't related to me, have preserved the memories of my family better than my
Yeah.
family did.
Yeah.
To the point where I went to Budapest and the curator of the museum was not in town. And he said, if he had been in town, he would have taken me to the grave of my great-great-grandfather in the old Jewish cemetery, which
Oh,
was very
wow.
hard to navigate. But because he wasn't in town, he couldn't take me. And essentially, like, I wouldn't be able to find it myself. So it's like this metaphor of, like, I actually could not find my great-great-grandfather's gravestone, and the person who could leave. Am I making you emotional? I'm sorry.
No,
The person
no,
who
I'm in.
could leave me there wasn't there. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So going back to the critic. Okay. So Artur Elek,
Yeah.
he's like my great-great-grandmother's nephew, something. He works for West. He's an art critic. Anyway, during the 40s, when things got to the point where, you couldn't go outside if you were Jewish in Budapest if you weren't wearing a gold star,
Sure.
he secluded himself at home because the humiliation was just intolerable to him, understandably. And the man who wrote this memoir was sort of like a godson to him and remembers going to visit him. And one of his rules for himself was he never displayed the art of any contemporary artist in his home or purchased it because he believed it would have compromised his objectivity. But when they went to visit at home, he had hanging on the wall during this period a painting by one of his favorite artists. And so this guy sort of saw it as a harbinger of like, he believes that he's not going to survive.
Oh, wow.
Because he had this, that was like really the first sign that like, this man doesn't believe that he's going to make it through the war or continue his career as a critic. He's essentially said, I'm hanging up my hat as a critic and I'm hanging up this contemporary art, which I avoided because my objectivity is so important to me. And that was true because he did get summoned to where they were interning people, starting off with artists, leftists, socialists,
sure.
And he shot himself because he didn't want to go.
Wow.
And so I, over the last few months, we're rereading all of these stories, sort of wondering like these questions, like what painting was it? I wish I knew. I think he had the artist's name, but I said, what was it? Was he looking at it? Was it the last thing he saw?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, this is such an intense story, but I feel like it really kind of cuts to the heart of like, these are new questions. And they have touched generations of my family in some way.
Yeah. Well, but it's also, I mean, look, who is it? Somebody was listening to something over the last 24 hours. It was talking about how history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Oh, is somebody asking a question of some guest of Kara Swisher's yesterday? Of who it was? It was of Heather Cox Richardson, the newsletter, the historian and the newsletter writer. Which is gets to something
Substacker,
which I want to get to in a second. Because I know you have I don't know if you have a point of view on it, but I want to ask you about it. But anyway, he said history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? Which is this truism that I don't know who said it, but it's out there. Listening to you tell the story and drawing the parallel between maybe people who are experiencing the end of a, let's call it, digital media environment that they know and hold sacrosanct, and needing to see a future where they have to leave that behind. The lesson to take away from the story you just told is you don't have to kill yourself. And I don't mean that in a literal, like, commit suicide way, but it's like you don't have to set things on fire. You can move to a next step and you can find value in the next step. And I think there's so much hand-wringing. There's so much hand-wringing right now that's just like, guys, just we're gonna take it forward.
And I always took it to be, there's actually a coda to this story. The coda is, after the war, the guy whose memoir it is, his father makes him go back to the apartment of Artur Elek and talk to, I don't know, it was his friend, his daughter, his landlady. And he says, you have to find out everything. You have to find out what type of gun he used. You need to find out, everything, because we need to document it, basically.
Wow.
So he goes to interview this woman, and they're sitting in Artur Elek's apartment, and there's a roaring storm outside. The door of the apartment blows open, hits him in the back of the head. His face hits the kitchen table. He breaks his nose, and he continues the conversation. And I think there's a lot of stuff about this story where it's like, yes, you don't have to kill yourself. We're grieving. Everyone is always sort of, in a sense, grieving the future they thought that they were going to have, whether you're grieving your career or some other disappointment, some other door closing, breaking your nose, whatever. But he does say, the man who wrote this memoir does say, like, he really saw, in this instance, this is somebody who's out of options, killing himself, and he saw it really as like a fuck you, kind of a triumphant, like, you'll never take me alive. thing. And that in that context makes a lot of sense. If you are living through this time period as an artist, like you can still embody the spirit of "you'll never take me alive," but make choices and changes that will allow you to like put food on your table. And I think those two things can live together. I often feel that way. I am like, I am sort of actually kind of a classic startup founder in that I have a incredible chip on my shoulder. It's different than the chip that somebody working in technology might have, but I'm very driven by spite. I'm very driven by anger. And in fact, like a certain type of investor only wants to invest in founders that are driven by spite and anger because they believe that they will do anything possible to outlast the market.
Okay, so talk. You got to talk about that. What is the source of the or what is the fuel for that?
Well, I mean, it's like the same reason everyone's angry, right? Like we were told, go to the right schools, do the right internships, get good grades, do everything right, be a good worker, and you will be able to work for the magazines that you admired. You will be able to work your way up, not immediately, but in time. If you do everything right, you'll be able to have this fulfilling, meaningful career. Not everyone, but the talented people.
Sure.
Yeah. And both times I was laid off, it wasn't through any fault of my own. Like I was performing above expectations. I was doing the job that I was hired to do. And so I think when you experience that sort of like arbitrariness, which is like, wait, my effort, like once you sort of break this idea, and we've all sort of been broken at the same time, like, oh, this, you break the idea that if you do everything right, you'll succeed. That arbitrariness of who succeeds and fails, who can stay in the industry, who has to leave, I think produces either extreme nihilism or kind of delusional optimism paired with resentment, which is like what I have. I'm optimistic enough to do this, but I'm still very angry. And so those two things can coexist.
Yeah.
And everyone has a version of that. But it's also like it's class resentment too, right? Like it's not necessarily class resentment in the traditional understanding. It's almost like creative versus technologist class resentment.
Sure.
And that is very valid. It goes in both directions, but I also think it's important to unpack because particularly in this moment, post-ZERP, this is the first time that I can remember the people who went straight from my college class into jobs at Google and Facebook are actually concerned for their jobs in the same way as my journalist peers.
Yeah, sure.
So for the first time, this contraction is happening in both industries at the same time, and the contraction is around the question of what does the future of technology and the internet look like, and what will that mean for these jobs? And so if there was ever a moment for solidarity between the creative class and the technology class, it would be now. But unfortunately, like when things are difficult, I think sometimes those differences and resentments just retrench.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's easier to double down. And I think Elon Musk really personifies that. He's almost like the human embodiment of that. But I do see like glimmers of what it might mean to like work through these questions together. And as somebody who's sitting at the intersection of technology and media, I have to see in both directions at the same time.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit. So sitting at the intersection of technology and media, you began your career, if I got this right, in audience development.
Yes, I did. So I always had to be aware of how social media was impacting the distribution models of these publishers, and how community and readerships were coming to know or to come to have a relationship with the publisher through a social media platform or through search. I entered that track pretty early. I had an internship at the social media desk at NPR.
Okay.
I think I thought I was going to be able to use that as a foot in and then become a writer and editor, which I was never able to do until, I would pick up some clips here and there when I was in-house at certain places, but I really wasn't able to pursue it fully until I got laid off and went freelance.
Yeah.
Then I was doing, doing some audience development on a client basis.
Yeah.
But I was also writing and doing all the stuff that I wanted to do for places like The Cut and GQ. So that was really exciting. And like, in a way, that sort of forced period of freelancing was, kind of a good thing, because it got me into being a writer as more of the majority of what I was doing. But
Sure.
I would not be able to have Dirt. I don't think I would have been able to start Dirt or understand how to start Dirt if I didn't have this audience development background.
Well, that's the thing. It's I don't know. Have you ever spoken to Sarah Fisher from Axios?
Yeah, I think so. She's covered Dirt, so I think I have talked to her in that capacity.
I find Sarah fascinating because Sarah started out in ad sales and then moved from ad sales to, this media beat and covering as a journalist. And what she and I have talked about is the idea that these tactics from ad sales and from journalism, in terms of like finding an angle, relentless pursuit, like backing things up and repeating and keeping stories alive, are very consistent. I think the audience development, when I heard that about you, when I read that about you, I was just like, oh, okay, this makes total sense that Daisy is both using an audience development hat to determine the ways in and the points of differentiation in terms of communication with the audience. But by the same token, that this editorial thing would give her the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to express my full value to this ecosystem, as opposed to just going, sorry, you're the audience development person, so you're going to figure out how to get us more likes on Facebook, as opposed to, hey, Daisy, get us more likes on Facebook and bring your sort of point of view to the publishing arm. Does it feel like that now? Does it feel like, as the major domo, does it make you feel like you're able to exercise both sides of your brain, so to speak?
For sure. I think I truly believe that I should be able to do every job within Dirt myself, except for like the technical stuff.
Sure.
And the first hire that I made was our contract social media manager, because I already had this very strong conviction that that would be the most important role. But if I wasn't able to have her, then I would have to do that job myself, and I would be able to. I mean, from a time perspective, I wouldn't,
right.
But I could. I'm capable of it, and I understand what she's doing, and I understand the value of what she's doing. I run the business side of Dirt. I raise the capital. I sell the ads. I edit the newsletter. I commission the writers. I do a social media. I send merch. I do customer service. Not alone. I have, the team has been different sizes at different times. I'm so grateful for everyone who's come in and out and been part of that team. But part of the survival of the company is knowing, in a worst case scenario, if you had to take the burn all the way down to yourself and you're working for free, can the company still run? What is the minimum viable version of this company? And for every founder, it's comes down to you yourself.
Yeah.
And I think people get into trouble when they start a company and they've been at the managerial level for so long that they actually haven't had to execute.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up with like pretty bloated mastheads. I don't want to call any specific person out, but I basically went straight from executing to being the executive.
Mm-hmm.
If you're further along in your career, to go back and know how many resources or people to hire to do these jobs that you actually haven't done in years, or maybe didn't even exist when you were that low on the totem pole.
You didn't know that they were jobs. Yeah.
It gets very easy to overspend on headcount.
Yeah.
I think that's one way people can go wrong. But in a media startup, in a technology startup, you have the same thing though, because sometimes you have a person who's like, I'm the ideas guy. Okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so sure, you're the ideas guy, but like, you also need to be the like customer service guy. Or be so good at raising money, it doesn't matter that you don't do anything else.
Right.
And sometimes that happens, but
So okay, so I want to then you know, viewers of the show, readers of the newsletter will know that that SIC for me is it is definitely like a side hustle and a sort of a passion project. But I want your advice on something. Okay, so it was always meant to, first it actually, when it started, it was meant to inform colleagues of mine at Vice when I was still there, who I didn't believe were as widely aware of the stuff that was affecting us in the marketplace as they needed to. When people outside of the company started to read it, and when I took it to Substack, I did so mainly because there was a very simple way for me to do that via Substack without having to learn a whole bunch of new skill sets or without having to hire anybody to execute it for me, and so on and so forth. And I now find myself in this conflicted place because of all of the controversy with the Nazi problem on Substack, so to speak. When I put something out to the newsletter and said, hey, this is a question that I'm contending with, any thoughts would be welcome, I got two responses. One of them was from you, which was, we use Beehiiv. And one of them was essentially like, yeah, I don't know, bro, you probably shouldn't hang out with Nazis, but like, keep it moving type thing. The advice I want from you is, how do I keep, what is the way to keep the trajectory going without like major sunk cost diversion on platform move?
Okay, well, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret, and it might come back to haunt me. So Beehiiv has way better analytics and segmenting than Substack does.
Okay.
But the primary advantage of Substack is the recommendation flywheel. So I assume that you're getting a certain number of SIC subscribers who are coming from people who are recommending the newsletter on their Substacks.
That's right.
And that is probably the thing that you're most worried about losing, right? Because you own your list.
Yeah, I do. I own my list. It's the other thing that I'm concerned about is just this is truly like a translation of the things that I read every morning as I kind of start my day, and I'm concerned about having to spend a bunch of time retooling. That's my other big concern.
Why would you have to retool though?
Because I just don't. Because I don't know that other platforms, be it Beehiiv, be it Ghost, be it what's the other one that people have been moving to, has an unlikely name. I want to give equal weight to all of these.
Paragraph?
No. It doesn't matter. We'll find it. I'll find it and I'll include it in the notes. But I'm not sure that the tool set is as simple and as obvious as the Substack one.
It is. My biggest thing with Beehiiv is they use Markdown, which makes me so uneasy.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Well, when you're doing when you're formatting, you are basically like the shorthand is like you would do a slash, and like this menu pops up and it lets you select italic or bold. So you're kind of formatting as you go rather than like highlighting and doing hypertext.
I see. Okay.
There is a bar. It's just a little different, and like the way that you drop photos in is a little different. I would say like I wouldn't base your decision on getting a hang of formatting because you will learn very quickly.
Sure. Okay.
The back end is not that different, and I think you would really enjoy that there's these pieces like segmenting and analytics on the back end where like if you had to do like what you did again where you cleared out inactive subscribers, you might have been able to move them to a segment where they get heard from you once a month, and you actually would have like lost them completely.
Sure.
And then you could move them back if they re-engage. So not that you have the bandwidth to do that individually, and to be honest, I don't use segmenting as much as I would like to, but it's an option. What I was going to tell you is you can leave your Substack parked. You're still going to like passively get people. You don't update it. You continue to get subscribers. You download them, you move them over to Beehiiv. But I wouldn't, and because you can do that without shutting your account down, I wouldn't let that piece, which would be my primary hesitation, which would be I'm losing
Yeah, the
this
recommendation
that's like
flywheel. Yeah.
existing flywheel, you can leave your shit parked.
So
And
okay, so
you can run it off of Beehiiv.
wow. I mean, truly problem solving answer there, Daisy. I like that. No. I mean, look, it's super pragmatic. I like that a lot.
Have you
I like
talked to
that.
Tyler at Beehiiv?
Ironically, we have talked a little bit, but not about that. Brian Morrissey connected us, and for me to connect them to
Is rebooting on Beehiiv now?
I'm pretty sure rebooting has been on Beehiiv because I think Brian's an investor, so I think that it would make sense that they would be, but I don't
okay.
actually.
Yeah,
I don't actually
okay,
know.
that makes sense. I don't know. Okay.
All right. Well, anyway, that's valuable advice. Well, listen, we've had this great conversation, which hasn't touched on the newsletter nearly as much as it might have, but I think we kind of got to all of the themes.
You know what it is? I just did this long form interview where I get weird about telling the same stories over and over again. So, I like not to plug an interview within an interview, but I think, I just went on long form recently and I talked about more of sort of like where I see dirt in the media ecosystem, although we didn't get into Web3 because Aaron said that people would come for him with pitchforks if I even mentioned the word NFT. But I actually feel like this is, to the extent that you have corollary sources, I feel like this interview could actually be a corollary source to the emotional stakes of dirt, because we didn't get into the emotional stakes at all or anything about my background really, or like where I came from or where my family comes from. So actually I really enjoyed doing this, and hopefully people aren't like, she didn't even talk about Condé Nast. But maybe you can link to the long form and just say like, hey, we sort of like discussed that this is kind of about the stakes and the emotional stakes of the media business at this moment. And if you want to know like more about the nitty gritty or sort of like the narrative around what Dirt is trying to build, like there's this long form interview that just came out, and it's not, they're coming out really close to each other. So nothing has shifted in that time period.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, I would be happy to. And I love a podcast within a podcast reference. Like, by all means, it's Ouroboros all day long. Well, Daisy, anything else that we should point people to, other than, of course, Dirt, which you can now, as I talked about before, subscribe to with a credit card, which I highly encourage people to do. Subscription's super valuable. I just think it's a great publication. And then other stuff that's worth shouting out?
Will, I saw that you included the Tom Ford book that we covered in Prune and then actually syndicated into Dirt. But there is a sign up form for Prune on the dirt.fyi site. But if you want to also link to the landing page to sign up for that, I think some people don't know that you're not automatically subscribed to both. And so if you're specifically interested in design and interiors, like I would love to plug Prune as its own entity within our ecosystem. Other than that, I don't think I have anything to plug right now. Oh, actually, the Nightlife Review zine just came out in print.
Cool.
I announced it to a smaller group that signed up to be updated on it, but I haven't announced it to the full list yet, and that's in our shop. So,
awesome.
flag
and
that.
Is that the first you've done? Prune did a one physical publication so far, right? Or is it
two
more than
zines?
One?
The
Two
Mike
of them.
Mills
Okay,
one
gotcha.
and the one with Ava Williams. Yeah, this is the first Dirt zine. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so and is that sort of physical publishing going to be a continued pursuit? And
people
activity?
Are asking for it. I think it'll still be a case-by-case basis, but people definitely want to have some print experience of Dirt. And, we signed on with literary representation last year. I think
cool.
What I'm really working towards is I would like to sell a book. And we're, I can't give too much away, but it's kind of, something we're working on. So, the zines are super fun. The ephemerality of that is fun, but we're also shooting for, something that could come out in, with a Penguin or a Simon Schuster. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, Daisy, it's been such a pleasure talking. Thank you for making the time. Like I said, I'm a fan, and so it's a pleasure to just interact at that level. But I also think what you're doing is emblematic of a new kind of publishing, and one that is going to, be important for people to pay attention to. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. All right. Well, we'll talk again soon. But in the meantime, thank you guys for tuning in. And we will see you next week.